excited? Awesome. Who brought the food? There we go. Perfect. Oh, congrats, Senshi. Awesome. So today I'm very excited because we are here with the Los Angeles Zoo and Cosplay for Science, and we are going to talk about some of the amazing, delicious science that is woven into the story of one of my personally new favorite animes, Delicious in Dungeon. It's super cool, so much cool food and ecology science. We're gonna go really in depth and look at some of these really cool ecologies and things like that are just so well woven into the show. So really quick, my name is Gabriel Santos. I will be your moderator today. I am a paleontologist in my real life when I'm not trying to drink the blood of all my party members. I am the co-founder of the Cosplay for Science initiative, and I'm also co-host for PBS Eons, a digital YouTube series about stories and deep time in paleontology. And joining me today are some really amazing experts. So why don't we all introduce ourselves, starting with Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Brown. I'm a professor at UCLA and also a paleontologist, but I've spent a surprising amount of time working with still living or very recently dead animals in national parks like wolves and their prey.
Philip.
Hey everyone, I'm Philip Caldabiano. I work at the LA Zoo as a curator of education focused on community partnerships and outreach. And I've been doing informal science education, trying to connect people to things I find really fun and nerdy for about 10 years or so.
And last but certainly not least.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Erin McGee and I am the coordinator of conservation engagement at the LA Zoo. So I run our paid internship program for college students, as well as put together panels like these and other kinds of outreach events around conservation. Outside of the zoo, I'm a herpetologist, and I studied how lizards are impacted by climate change and things like that, and I run a game on social media called #FindThatLizard.
Super cool. Make sure you're following. I usually will find the lizard half the time. Sometimes I'll ask Aaron. He's like, I don't see it. So to get started, like Delicious in Dungeon, right? It's just a really cool story of 4 party members who go down into the dungeon, and some stuff happens on the first episode. And then they have to go back and rescue it, but they don't have a lot of supplies. And so to do this, to survive the dungeon, they resort to eating monsters. And so that feels like kind of the main part of the show, is where they're making these really cool, delicious looking recipes. I definitely want to try and mimic at one point in my life if they were real. But what's actually really cool is behind that, there's these really amazing scenes where like Laios and Senshi, they kind of go in depth and talk about the ecology, the way that the monsters live in harmony in the dungeon, the way that they've adapted to survive in these very different environments. And so that's what we're going to go into today, is looking at some of these really cool science concepts that are in the show. I think we're going to start with some of these complex food webs that we see in the show. And then Aaron, you want to talk a little bit about like the zoo as well, right? Kind of like how that folds into this.
Yeah, so when I started watching this anime, I was just like, wait, my science, brain is starting to tingle here. There is a lot of like really direct correlations, and I think that later on in the series, especially when we get to the floor with like all the water and stuff, and since she is talking about like the blade fish, and Marcel is just like, I would rather destroy a monster's ecosystem than to, die here. I think that gets to a lot of stuff that we see in real life. And at the zoo, what we're really trying to get people to understand is that humans are part of nature, and this is like it's all interconnected, and we want to help people to have that better connection in seeing our wildlife. And because when you see our wildlife, when you know about it, that's how you know the conservation work that we can be doing, and we want it to be meaningful, so that way people will actually do it. And I think that Phil can kind of get into some of that interpretation of like, how do we go through that process of getting people from seeing something and knowing about it to actually caring about it?
Yeah. Somebody before was a little bit shorter than me. I should have just yeah, so I have a really fun job at the zoo of being something called an interpreter. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean I know a lot of other languages. That would be really great. It's probably really more applicable. But interpretation's helping somebody connect to the resource at hand. So in a time like this, connecting to an anime that I'm assuming we all really enjoy, but also connecting to kind of what's around us at the zoo. That could be a lot of those animals. I like to try to connect it to animals that are in our neighborhoods, right? And sorry, my brain's being pulled in two directions right now, so somebody on either side can help me. Talking more about connections, more about complex food webs right now. I think that there's often times where there's a lot of science that we see around us on a day-to-day basis that we're not always aware of, right? So my favorite example of a complex food web to draw from the anime, I absolutely adored the mimics. My undergrad studies were in marine biology, so the fact that mimics were a crowd was something I've never thought of, and I absolutely immediately fell in love with. Before that, my experience with mimics was like Chill Chucks, where I play a lot of D&D, and I've never been a fan because I've never had a good experience with a mimic. But I really adore the way that they have them displayed in the anime, and that connection with them and the treasure bugs, the treasure insects, being almost like a parasitoid wasp, was something that absolutely clicked with my sciencey brain. And it's that kind of a connection, right? This little creature that seems unimposing compared to the much larger predatory one that even takes out adventuring parties, right? But they then lay their eggs inside that mimic and take it over from the inside and become a chest full of treasure. We have things like that literally right outside. Here in downtown LA, you go ahead and find some plants. There's gonna be some insect life on there. There's gonna be things that are parasitoid like those wasps. And there are countless of those really cool biological interactions around us. So I like trying to help people realize it's not all animals far away. Something that's really close to home. We just gotta put our nature eyes on it and take a closer look.
Well, since you shared that, Philip, Aaron, Caitlin, what are like some of your favorite creatures that have come from Delicious in Dungeon, and kind of like what was like the thing that drew to them and like the inspiration from the real world?
To go. I do usually in my science life study the large, charismatic, powerful creatures, but I actually really loved the Undine because it reminded me a lot of the real life animal slime molds. They're real life slimes. They're very small, but then they will kind of move together and become a large moving being. They go from being small, almost stationary, to a mega organism. And I really like that this water-based version of that existed, and also, you know, the animation, the whole scene with it was just phenomenal.
And terrifying.
Yeah.
Super terrifying.
Yeah.
Cool. You actually kind of took mine. I was also gonna go with the Undine, and now I have to think of something else. I think that probably maybe one of my other favorites was the Kelpie, and I think that because, like, you know, its whole storyline with Senshi, and that it was just like so cute, and it's one of those things that just kind of like reminds us that, you know, animals, like as cute as they might be, are wild, and there's a lot of cute things out there that we want to go and touch, and we want it to be our friends, and then it's just like, actually no, they are not our friends, they are not our pets, and we should like view them from afar and appreciate them from afar.
I really loved living armor, right? I thought, because, you know, when you play D&D, it's just traditionally they're these armors that have been brought to life with magic, and the way they did it in the show was just such a cool take. Is that like it's a shell of a mollusk. Mollusks are like shellfish, octopus, anything that's a squishy body, right? And sometimes they have a shell over it. It was so cool the way that they created this whole lifestyle of they hatch, they form together as colonies, and they move together by using their squishy bodies as muscles to protect their eggs that they keep inside the armor. So there's so many cool concepts in there, from what's it called, convergent evolution to mimicry, and all this really cool kinds of adaptation. It was such an amazing way of talking about living armor that I remember sitting there watching the anime for the first time, and I was like, I'm gonna watch this episode again. This was so cool. I totally forgot the rest of the story by that point. I was like, more of this, more of this.
And they lead you into thinking it's like the D&D living armor. They're like, oh, a magician's gonna, you know, some dark wizard is in. No, it's just animals.
Just animals.
And now we gotta get on to other things, but I do have one more that I just thought about. I love the cleaners, because like our scavengers and our are organisms like fungi and stuff that actually go in and like break things down and decompose things so they can, you know, become nutritious again for other organisms. Like they are so underrated and go so unnoticed, and then for them to have like such a prominent part in the anime, I thought that that was really cool.
And then, you know, I think one of the cool things, like kind of connecting all this, is these four heroes, I guess, they go into the dungeon, and one of the things that's unique, kind of not really on the forefront of the story, is they don't really belong in this environment, right? They kind of mess with the ecosystem of things a little bit. And so, Kaylin, like you've studied these kinds of food webs. How do you study these? Like, if you were going in that world, how would you look at these complex food webs as a scientist versus an adventurer? And kind of how do you think a human would mess with those kinds of ecosystems?
I mean, one of the key ways, obviously, is trying to change either the number of predators by bringing that down to a safer level for humans, or by maybe overhunting the prey that those predators need. And that's certainly something we've seen in a number of places all over the planet for generations upon generations. The thing I think about in the dungeon setting specifically is that for us as humans here, it's actually really difficult to see these changes happen sometimes. It happens over maybe one human's lifespan or many humans' lifespans. So if we want to find out about maybe what the original state or the more balanced state was like, you know, we need to talk to people who have been there for years and years. In the dungeon setting, though, maybe having some longer-lived races around might help a little bit. And you would have people who said, I remember what it was like, and it used to be this way, and we'd like to try to bring it back. Like, it might make conservation much easier in a dungeon than it is in the real world, where we really need to dig and find those people who can tell us those stories.
I'm glad you said conservation. Erin, for you, you're a conservation biologist, and like how do you see that as a human? Like, they go in, they hunt, or even the party, they like kill these monsters for food. How would you like go about that from a conservation perspective? Would you actually go and like eat these monsters?
Absolutely. I would eat anything Senshi made. I'm not gonna lie. And you know, there is nothing wrong with like hunting and things like that per se. And like hunters are actually like really big parts of conservation. When you go out like hunting or fishing or anything like that, you have to buy a license, and the money for that license goes directly to conservation. And we just have to think about, how are we doing it? Are we doing it ethically, or are we doing it unethically? If we're like over hunting and overfishing things to the point of extinction, then that's a problem. However, if we're doing it in a way where people are able to, you know, engage with their culture, if they're able to feed their families, and then we are still in balance with the rest of nature outside of us, then it really isn't an issue. And I think that the entire time, Senshi's character really gets at that. And so I think that I kind of like really relate with him, and you know, let's only take what we need and not take more than that.
Kaylin, what did you think of like some of the examples of these ecosystems and the way they kind of got messed up because of adventurers? I think one that's really cool was the bladefish and the kraken example, right? They really had this wonderful story of like, we're going in, we're killing too many bladefish, that makes the kraken angry, and it's going to start hunting other things. Did you think that was a really good example of both the complex food webs and the way that humans can exist in balance with nature?
Absolutely, and I think that it is common for the effects of human overhunting to sometimes show up with the predators fairly quickly. The difference being that we don't often have them in turn start hunting us as their backup prey base. But in the real world, it might be more like what they talked about in the series, where if one predator goes away, another one that was sort of under the rule of that bigger being might instead become really populous. And an example from the real world is sometimes in places where we have caused wolves to dwindle or go extinct, coyotes have become incredibly common. You can sort of release a predator you weren't particularly thinking about unintentionally by, you know, messing with these relationships, and it can happen so easily.
I mean, some of those dishes look so delicious though. I'm like, I don't know, that kraken would have made some really good calamari, I feel like.
And everything in moderation.
Yes.
That's true, that's the thing.
Kraken also gave them parasites because they ate way too much of it and didn't cook it all enough, right? So all things in moderation, I think so.
But I think that's a great thing to talk about on your side, right? Is like, how do you teach conservation? Like, would you use examples from the show as a way to bridge that gap for people to make that connection?
Yeah, completely. I think if you want to teach something effectively to somebody, you have to meet them where they're at, right? My favorite thing about my job is that I get to talk to like 4-year-olds and also 80, 94-year-olds, right? I've had grandparents with their grandkids and I can teach them about a similar topic. Obviously, I'm going to be doing it in slightly different ways. But even like a little kid will kind of understand some of that, like this thing, you know, this might harm it, it needs a little bit more to do well, this is taking too much. Little kids understand sharing, right? So yeah, I think when it comes to trying to teach conservation, it kind of depends on the topic. If we're talking about something like, man, but I really love calamari and I wish I could just eat so much more of it all the time. If only it came in a gigantic form that would sustain so many people, that would be really convenient, right? But, you know, like Erin kind of mentioned, the overfishing, like with the fishing industry in California, that hit very, very heavily. And I think now people can look back on that and easily learn about that conservation of like sustainable farms of where we can fish something, or only taking what you might need there, right? Senshi being a great role model, he's like, we gotta feed the youth. They have to be healthy. However, we also have to like moderate what we're taking in order to feed them and take what you need. So, yeah, not too tricky. Just takes time.
You're like the Senshi of the zoo, I feel like, right?
I need like 4 more feet of beard. So if I could ever get to that point, like the Senshi in the middle, looking at you, you're a hero. Yeah, one day.
Well, I think Senshi is such a great role model in a way of that show, right? Like he's this voice of reason and wisdom because he's lived so long in the dungeon and has studied it to understand these balances and things like that. And he even understands that he needs to make changes himself in order for him to survive, but finds a way to make it sustainable. I think a great example of that is the monster gardens. That is such a cool way, and one of the things he talks about is like the 3 Sisters method, and it's this really multi-level educational thing. Erin, do you want to kind of share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so with the 3 Sisters method, you have corn, beans, and squash. Those are like the traditional plants that get planted together, where the corn provides structure for the beans, and then the beans fix nitrogen in the soil, which is a resource for other plants to use, and then the squash provides ground cover to prevent weeds from coming up and taking other nutrients. And so when you think about having these different crops together, you have, you know, all of these essential like nutrients and resources coming, as opposed to like monocultures where you only have one crop planted and you lose the benefits from the other 2. And so like coming even further from that, thinking about, you know, how we have lawns or, you know, a lot of like grass and stuff around versus having like our native plants. And the natives, all of these things actually like work together as an ecosystem. So like some things that we might think of as weeds, which is just, weeds are just like plants that are, you know, unwanted, not necessarily having a value to them, not being bad. We need some of these plants actually to keep our ecosystems going because they provide food for our, you know, our birds, our small mammals, our reptiles, and things like that. And one of the really cool things in the city is that Los Angeles will essentially pay you to like take out your lawns and to replace it with native gardens. So in the picture we have there, the zoo actually used to have like a bunch of grass around in different places, and so we actually did the turf replacement program with the city, and we got a bunch of volunteers and we worked with this really cool native plant nursery called Theodore Payne to get a bunch of native plants, and we planted them around the zoo so we can have like these native gardens where we'll have, you know, hummingbirds come in, we'll see praying mantises, we'll see, you know, lizards, snakes, all of these different like wildlife actually using this habitat that we're creating. And it's something that everybody here can do. Like that is like an actual conservation thing that is attainable for anyone who has a lawn that can be replaced. Or if you don't have a lawn, you can just like get native plants and like put them on your windowsill or your balcony and things like that, and provide actual real food and habitat for our native species, because even though we live in a city, like there's still a lot of wildlife here and we should protect it.
Do you think LA could benefit from our own monster gardens? Can you imagine trying to drive down Figueroa and there's just like a golem with like a bunch of like cabbages and poppies on there? You're like, ooh, pretty.
I mean, I prefer it to normal traffic, so
Yeah.
it'd be more fun to look at, you know. And there's a benefit to that, so.
But I think that's cool because it's like a lot of times a lot of folks, when we think about conservation, we just think about the animals. But the plants are just so important. There's this concept, I think, called plant blindness. A lot of people will just look at a plant and be like, green plant, cool. But we forget how essential and a part of our whole ecosystem it is. Delicious and Dungeon does a great job of reminding us that because when they're going through, there's no vegetables for them because they're underground. So Senshi has to create this way of growing plants and vegetables, and it helps benefit other things. You know, like at the zoo, right? You guys have to do so much work to ensure that there are plants, native plants, and other plants for your animals. And essentially, the zoo is kind of its own enclosed dungeon type. So you got to do what Senshi did. What is that like?
My brain's just now realizing I work in a dungeon.
Senshi, look!
Oh, my D&D dreams. Yeah, so the zoo is, you know, we're right in the middle of Griffith Park at the LA Zoo. It's in the middle of the natural ecosystem already, so we'll have deer that are already outside, squirrels that get into the animal habitats all the time. But when you have that many animals, it is the responsibility of the zoo to make sure that they're well cared for all the time. So I guess our nutritionist team and our animal keepers kind of work like the zoo's Senshi, because they have to find a way to get proper nutrients to all of the animals out there, right? The biggest issue in episode 1 is that they didn't have enough sleep and they weren't well fed, and then all the bad stuff happened. So we want to prevent that by keeping our animals nice and nutrient filled. We have an enrichment garden that we keep in the zoo as well. So the keepers will go ahead and collect browse from nice young trees that we plant, and also just around the city. And then in that enrichment garden, it's full of things like Aaron was talking about, native plants that some of our local species can go ahead and use and just coexist with in there. Brings us a lot of our beautiful pollinators, right? Our butterflies and our hummingbirds and our bats at nighttime. But it also has a lot of plants that might be more for like physical or mental stimulation for some of the animals, right? I'm gonna go out on a limb. I think everybody here, a little bit of our enrichment is probably being kind of nerdy, right? We're all here at Comic-Con. I think this is a pretty enriching experience for everybody. I hope you can all agree with that, right? So we have our vices, we have the things we like to do for fun. So do every other creature out there, right? We want to make sure animals are being stimulated in a way that they would in the wild. So we might have certain plants that smell a certain way or that feel a certain way. And we can go ahead and put that in an animal's habitat. Does anybody here have like a dog or a cat at home? Yeah, have you ever seen that animal roll around in something, maybe a bunch of dirt, or I'm sorry, I'm gonna go there, maybe a bunch of poop, right? That moment where you're like, oh my gosh, I have to clean you off again, why are you eating that? That's the response a lot of animals have when they want to smell more like their environment, right? They're masking a scent or they're trying to blend in with that. Well, we can do that with a lot of the plants that we have in our enrichment garden. We don't want our animals rolling around in poop, right? But we can give them some nice lavender that they can go ahead and brush up on, and we find preferences they have, and we can give them the things that they find some joy in, right?
And Kaylin, since you study food webs, both prehistoric and modern, right? Like, first of all, how important are plants in these kinds of complex food webs? And then, after that, if you were thrown into this dungeon, what would be the first thing you look for to try to better understand like some of the food webs you see?
Gotcha. Plants absolutely are a big part of it. In fact, that's how we noticed some of the land-based food webs being really skewed in some of America's national parks, was really looking at photographs and seeing that the plant community had changed so drastically. Like, that was our red flag that said we really need to look at what caused this, and then it fed all the way up the ecosystem to the small animals, the large animals, everything. So it's, and if anything, something we should have been watching from the beginning, but they had plant blindness. They just wanted to look at the big, charismatic, muscular, furry creatures, which is really understandable, but you know, as naturalists, we gotta look at the plants as well. If I were in that dungeon, though, I would probably not look at them, I have to admit. I'm gonna go straight for bones. It's just gotta be bones all the way. And maybe a question of, you know, I can try to figure out what ate something by looking at pulverized bones and waste or something like that. But I'm a paleontologist, and that's really like where my brain goes immediately all the time.
And I'm very glad you brought up bones. Oh, did you say something?
I was just say going right to the monster food to look at bones.
Yeah.
That's how you know you're a scientist.
Can you imagine walking around like in a dungeon and there's just someone in the corner and you come around and just like their hands in like dragon poop, right? And just like, don't look at me.
There's also corpse retrievers, so it's a weird place already. You know?
Well, I'm really glad you brought up bones because it's the paleontologist time to like have some fun. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you're good.
What are the cool? I don't want to say cool. One of the fun moments in the show is after they get to the red dragon. Spoilers, sorry, you wouldn't be here if you hadn't seen the show. So after they get to the red dragon, they cut it open and they're like, all right, let's get Fallon back. And then Fallon's just a bunch of bones at that point, right? And they're like, I can do this. And then they kind of mess it up a little bit. I mean, a lot. Well, it's a disaster. So, Caleb, when it comes to paleontology, how hard is it really? When we find bones, right, and we're going around, we find disarticulated or broken apart, how hard is it really to know what it belongs to what? How can we really put together these long dead creatures?
I feel like if you assess over bones long enough, it's just second nature. You're like, I know what that is, I know what that is. You can look at a piece of meat someone has roasted from the grocery store and start picking pieces out of it. It's really something you have to contain during normal meal times, actually. But yeah, I think in the situation that they were in, having handled hundreds upon hundreds of dire wolf skeletons from the tar pits, I feel like I can pick out, wolf and dog-like things second nature. And the uncanny thing was the show's always 3 seconds behind my brain because they have to animate and speak at a normal pace instead of the way I think about it. But immediately I was thinking, oh, would the ribs be hard? No, they wouldn't be that hard because they're definitely more flattened. Okay, what about the spine? And then they start showing the exact same sequence that I would be going through. And they come to the same conclusion, like, we could probably do this, but fingers are so hard. Like, anybody who draws knows that, and also anyone who's trying to put together skeletons, it's rough.
There's actually really, I'm gonna say cool, because it's really funny examples in paleontology where we've messed up entire animals because we found something like, sure, that fits. Like the brontosaurus, right? Who knows the story of the brontosaurus? Okay, perfect. So the brontosaurus is this dinosaur that was discovered a long time ago, and it's been this dinosaur for a long time, and then eventually we went back and we looked at the fossil, and we realized they had the wrong head on that dinosaur. So for a long time, it was like, I love Brontosaurus. That doesn't exist, I'm sorry. And it was the wrong head on the wrong creature. So we had to rename it, and it became Apatosaurus. And it's really fun, but it happens because we're looking at dead animals. Do you have any other examples, Caitlin, you can think of?
Shamefully, the same crew that was involved with the Brontosaurus debacle put the skull on the tail end of one of the plesiosaurs, the big Loch Ness monster looking ones. That was described and like formally drawn out for a little while, and then they're like, that's the butt end, gotta switch it.
They actually made fun of, this is a quick segue, they made fun of that in Pokemon in the Galar region, so you can see some of those weird Pokemon that are combined together. That's making fun of real paleontologists. So you can laugh at them next time you see them. Like, Aaron, in the modern world, does that happen a lot too, where like modern bones that you may be looking at, do things get swapped around, or is it even hard trying to identify modern lizard bones for your job sometimes, if you have to?
I do not have to do anything with bones, I'm so sorry.
It's just us. Looking at the bones, and part of that was because they kind of went through this journey about like learning about the monsters and that they were eating them and learning about their anatomy. That's how they kind of came to the conclusion, like, oh, let's put Fallon back together. And when they realized they made a mistake, their whole conclusion was like, let's eat Fallon, right? Let's save the day by cooking somehow. But in the real world, would we just see a monster and just like, yes, food? Is that something we would do? Is that safe to say?
Human beings?
Yeah, absolutely. When I take people on like tours and stuff like that, or like if we're like in Griffith Park and we're having like these trail cleanups and stuff like that, and with like different plants and whatnot, especially, so like you all probably have seen mustard. It is actually highly invasive, and so it shouldn't be here, but it is edible. And so I'll tell people, yeah, this, that, and the other, it's edible. And then people are like, oh, but so I can actually eat it right now? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, if you want to eat it, you can. And so like all the time people are like, can I eat that? And so there will absolutely be people, if a monster showed up, the first thing they're gonna try to do is eat it.
I do think that's like human nature. It either goes to like, can I touch it, or can I eat it, or maybe both, right? That is kind of at the core of a lot of, yeah, for better and worse.
I will absolutely be the first person to die. Like if you know like the scene in like Alien when they're going in and like they're touching stuff.
Yep.
Like that's gonna be me. Like I'm gonna be like, ooh, what is that? And I'm like, what does it feel like? And so I already know it's okay. I'm gonna die.
You turn around and Erin just has a face hugger on her face right away. Like, I knew it. I just knew it.
Keep an eye on me.
I'm having all my bad science moments go through my brain where I touch things I shouldn't. It's giving me rashes or stun me or something. So don't do that. Learn from us and don't touch anything unless you totally know what it is. And probably if it's wild, still don't touch it. Disclaimer. Sorry.
I mean, like, coming back a little bit, we talked a little bit about hunting, right? So, Kaylin, like, we know there's, like, people who hunt for food and things like that, but kind of connecting Erin's point, like, some people just want to eat things. There's a problem where, like, some folks are hunting endangered or illegal animals because it's, like, it's a cool thing to eat it. That's a problem, right?
I mean, yeah, because again, they're endangered, there's already so few of them, and I think that's really back to our point about everything in balance, and that's definitely something we want to keep in mind. Unfortunately, if you've already gotten to the point of we're looking at the last few dozen or few hundred of something, that's probably the time to put the brakes on the eating, and unfortunately that's kind of where it's like an extra rare thing, like that kind of human nature. It's like, can I touch it, can I befriend it, can I eat it, and also can I have like the collector's set of everything that I'm obsessed with. Unfortunately that kind of goes into some exotic animals as well.
And Erin, from a conservation standpoint, like a lot of these demand, I guess, for weird, rare animals kind of starts this illegal trade. That really messes up our environment, right?
Yeah, so when we are pulling animals out from their ecosystem, so like, have any of you guys like heard of niches? So like it's when an animal or even a person, so like if you think of, like some cosplayers have their niche for their specific anime or fandom or whatever, but like animals have like ecosystem services. They have roles in their environments that they perform, whether it's predators, whether they're breaking down nutrients, whatever. And when you take them out from their role and there's no other organisms to fill those in, then you can see ecosystem collapse and things like that. So we really don't want to be pulling animals out and furthering like the illegal wildlife trade and then hurting our ecosystems in turn. And so I thought that it was really, getting back to Senshi and his Kopi, I thought it was like a really good point on, these are wild animals, not necessarily our friends, and we should only, be viewing them from afar and not necessarily trying to have them as pets. And so the zoo actually runs a program called the Not a Pet campaign, and it's really just to like educate people about what goes into having these animals in your home and how it can hurt the ecosystems. And one of the really big points is just also like the care for the animal themselves. A lot of times, like you might think like some people, like you can see on TikTok, and they're like feeding raccoons and stuff like cat food, and it's just like, well, that's not actually a balanced diet for the raccoon. And so a lot of the times when animals are overfed, it's either one, they end up biting the humans that feed them because they're wild animals and that happens, or they get some kind of like degenerative or like disease type thing, or they don't like actually, if they're young, their bones don't form correctly because they're not eating what they're supposed to be eating.
And Phil, for you as the education person, right? How would you kind of educate people to not do that? I mean, there's so much on the internet from like Mudang and things like that where people see cute animals, but that kind of has a plus and negative side to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does, right? There's this fine line of, if you see a lot of those cute animals, you might go a little bit like Laios and be like, I really am into this, I want to learn everything about it, and you can take that standpoint. Sometimes though, it's people who get that collector set situation, and they want to have that animal, right? So the wildlife pet trade One of the easiest things that we can all do to help with it is if we're scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever your social media of choice is, and you see videos of people with their cute little pet primate. Primates should not be pets. I get it, when I was a little kid, that's all I wanted. I just wanted a best friend who was a monkey, and or a chimpanzee, because I loved Curious George. Ape, yes, not tail. Anyway, but that's not fair for that animal. It's more self-serving for the human. We can't provide what that animal needs, and something dangerous could happen. But if you like that video, or if you share that video, and those people are getting likes and they make money on it, they're gonna keep trying to do that. I'm gonna get a little dark here, but we also just talked about somebody pulling their sister's corpse out of a dragon's stomach, so I think it's fine. Those animals are often collected from the wild, and it is more profitable if they are a baby. So in some cases, that means that the parents who are trying to protect that baby are taken out in whatever way the person can, and that's normally just killing them because it's easier, right? So that leads to a lot of conservation issues with endangered species, and it can be as simple as not pushing more of that forward on social media. So in educating people about that, I do get a little bit too blunt, maybe a little bit blunt for kids sometimes too, but I think it's important. Kids, I think, can handle a lot more than a lot of us adults will give them credit for. When it comes to hard topics like that, they get that, and these animals should live where they naturally, would, and they shouldn't be a pet if they shouldn't be a pet, and that human food is not animal food, right? And they need different things. When talking about the nutrition, it's easy to talk about what kind of food do you eat at home, and what do you need to build strong bones and to grow up nice and tall, or be healthy, and talk about how that would affect an animal if they aren't getting that right.
I think.
One more point. There are a lot of animals at the zoo actually that come to us as confiscations.
Yeah.
So you have to have special permits to have wild animals, and because we're a zoo and a city organization, we do have those permits. And so there are, the zoo actually just became part of this Southern California Southern California Confiscation Network, and so it's essentially because a lot of the times there are not enough places for the animals that are coming through LAX. There's not enough places for those animals that are getting confiscated to go, and unfortunately we can't just send them back to where they came from because we don't know exactly where it is that they came from. Like they could come from a country in Asia, but then it's like that animal might have a home range in multiple different countries, and we're not exactly sure where it was collected from. We don't know if it the kind of care that it got, if it had any parasites or any diseases or any things like that, and then there are just no agreements between countries to actually send animals back that have gotten smuggled in. So then it's just like, okay, well, where are these animals going to go now? So they either come to us, the zoo, they might go, San Diego or somewhere else, or some other kind of rehabilitation rescue center, that type of thing. And so it's just there is no winning for the animal in that moment, unfortunately.
I feel really bad because we were just saying Senshi's the hero, but that photo looks like he got caught with that organization, right?
Oh my god.
It's no, I didn't smuggle them out of the
The
dungeon.
important thing though, he only visited Anne the Kelpie at that level of the dungeon, right? And he had a lot of love for Anne. He named her after the horse that he had with his other dwarven friends, right? So there's that care, but he left her in her environment. He shouldn't have been touching her, trying to take a ride on her back in the water, but that was a different story,
All right, so we're gonna kind of sum things up really quick, so we're running out of time. One last question for our panelists. What was your favorite meal in Delicious and Dungeon, and why would you definitely eat it?
I want that holy water sorbet so badly, so badly. It's got bugs in it, it's made of ghosts, it looks rainbow and delicious. It reminds me a lot of the artificially colored stuff I ate in my childhood, and I would desperately, desperately like to put that in my body.
This is honestly the hardest question of the whole thing. And throughout this entire weekend, I've gone through 20 options, but I like eating bugs. I like eating bugs. Bugs are delicious. You should all try it if you haven't yet. They're a great source of protein and very healthy. The treasure insect jam that they make just looks so much like candy. This is a similar reasoning. It's colorful and looks delicious. And so I think I would enjoy that most. And my weird curiosity is I just want to take a raw bite of the Baromet's sheep and see, does it taste more like plant or more like meat? What's going on here? It was the weirdest thing in there. It's just, my brain doesn't wrap around it well.
I too must absolutely eat the holy water sorbet. I just need to know what a ghost tastes like. Like I can kind of imagine what just about everything else tastes like, but I cannot wrap my head around what a ghost would taste like, and it irritates my brain just a little bit, not annoying.
Yeah, that's true.
I need me that mimic hot pot. Like, oh man, can you imagine? It's a cold night, well, cold in California night, and you just have this giant pot with like crab claws that big with a little bit of like sesame sauce. Oh, I would. Yeah, I just need mimics to be real. Well, they kind of are, but yeah, but sustainable. Yeah, it'll be sustainable. So that kind of does it for our little bit of our discussion. Before we move, like, give a big round of applause for our amazing. Thank you. So before we move on to some questions, I want to give a little bit of announcements. First things first is you can come visit us downstairs at our Museum of Natural Wonders. We're in aisle 2200. After the panel, all of us will be down there so you can ask us more questions. And then also, we have a really cool event coming up that I'll let Erin talk about.
Yeah, so we're doing a Dungeons and Dragons themed nature quest. We're going out to Bayona Wetlands, which is near LAX, and we are going to be using the iNaturalist app to document some wildlife. And so if any of you guys have ever gone outside or even been at home and been like, I wonder what kind of spider that is, or I wonder what kind of bird that is, or I wonder what kind of plant that is. The iNaturalist app is really cool because it will essentially, the algorithm, once you take a picture, you upload it, the algorithm will give you a recommendation, and then real life researchers and scientists will come up behind the algorithm and either confirm its recommendation or say, no, it's actually this instead. And it's a really great way to do actual real life science and conservation because not only do they come up and help you with IDing whatever it is that you're seeing, but scientists use this database as a way to do real research that makes a difference in our everyday lives around conservation and our ecosystems.
Think about it like this. You have a free Saturday, come and LARP and do science at the same time by the beach. That sounds really great, right?
Sunday, not Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday. Look, it's been a long Comic-Con.
You can also do that any weekend if you want.
That's true, yeah.
But do it with us, please.
Yes.
I gotta prove something to my boss. And speaking of proving things to my boss, next slide, please.
Yes.
I am coming to you on my hands and knees. Please fill out the survey so that I can prove to them that people like stuff like this. And then they'll let us keep doing it. So.
And also please tag LA Comic-Con and say you want science content like this at the con so that we can continue to have support and, you know, bridge together these fun worlds of fantasy science fiction and the real science. More scientists can come here. You know, we love cosplaying too.
And even if you didn't like this, you can tell us on the survey what it is that you do want. So part of my job is actually getting the zoo away from Griffith Park and engaging with new communities around conservation. So I'm always looking for ideas of different outreach events that we can do. And so I would appreciate any suggestions that you guys might have as well.
All right, we have some time for questions. Who has questions for our panelists today? Jinx.
Speaking of, you guys ever eat anything that's not traditionally, eating things like alligator? You guys ever eat things like that?
So the question is eating things that are like kind of not like in our normal food groups that we have.
Yeah, I think maybe the coolest thing that I've ever eaten is a honey pot ant. So they're found in southern Arizona into Mexico. And so they have ants that act as storage. And so then the other members of the colony will come in and feed it nectar. And so essentially like its butt gets so big and filled with honey, it ends up being see-through and you can see the honey. And then it like essentially just pops in your mouth like a gusher and it just tastes like honey and it's a lot of fun.
Ant gushers.
Yeah.
since you mentioned alligator, have had alligator. It's pretty delicious. But I think my favorite thing, when I was in my undergrad, I had a professor for a California ecosystems class that took us on hikes a lot, and he would make his own trail mix and like buy the 5-gallon bucket and just scoop it in the bags for all of us. And that was the first time I ate different insects, and it was like just a potpourri of different crickets and ants, and you know, the ants were like a little bit of lemon pepper kind of taste in there. They get a little stuck in your mouth sometimes, but you know, you wash it down with water and it's fine. So a lot of the little cutesy crawly critters I enjoy.
I've also enjoyed some of the cutesy crawly critters, but only in tiny amounts. I think the other thing that I've enjoyed was American antelope in Yellowstone. One of them had a vehicle collision. It was really unfortunate, but we wanted to, you know, sort of honor and make the best of it, and it was awesome. Like antelope venison rocks.
Oh yeah, I want to try that. I think the weirdest thing I've ever eaten was probably, I've tried that guinea pig when I was in South America. I don't say weird, it was just different. It tasted good, honestly, but then I could not go into Petco after that. There's another question over here. Fallon. Or no, sir. Marcel.
Awesome cosplay.
Yes.
I have a question about how different from science, but also how politics play into the anime as well. Because we have the elves coming over to the island. What's your opinion?
Yeah, so the question's a little bit about the politics, like with the elves coming on to the island later. Great question.
I have a very strong opinion that is not necessarily sanctioned by the zoo, because we don't actually necessarily talk about politics a lot at work, which I think, in my own personal opinion, is a disservice to the work that we're trying to do, because conservation, like anything, is highly political. And so earlier, when I was talking about hunting, and I mentioned that, you know, it's a way for people to like engage with their culture. So, you know, and stuff like that ends up being political, unfortunately. But you know, as a Black woman, like I am very much into like making things more accessible, especially around nature, jobs, and recreation, and things like that. And so when we are thinking about like, why do we even have to do conservation in the first place? And a lot of the times it's like, okay, well, people are, you know, doing like logging, or they're, you know, doing like burning down the rainforest to like raise soy and other monocultures and things like that. It's, you know, it all gets into, you know, how can we make money? How can we, you know, sell things and things like that? And then when you get into money, things get political. So there is definitely real life political things that I think are interesting that the show actually really touches on, that does reflect our real life, and we should talk about it more.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think it's important to, since you bring up that like the money aspect of it, right? The whole reason they're in dungeons, and they bring it up several times, is you can make money going in there, right? They even like trash talk the siblings for being like the gold scrapers at first, right? But there are groups of other races in it that want to get to that area to make a profit on that island. They want what's in that dungeon. It's all for that, you know, light at the end of the tunnel for them. And that I do really appreciate that the anime brings those up in a few different points, whether it's moments with like, you know, Chilchuck's very strong feelings on like, this is how the elves treat me and all the people like me, right? The fact that they're so different, or the different lifespans of them, and that pops up. It is rooted in so many things that are reflected in our very real world, in ways that certain groups of people try to make a profit by taking things from other groups of people, right? Maybe we'll see more of that in the next season. I really hope so. I haven't read the manga because I don't want spoilers, but I kind of want to, because thank you for bringing that up.
It also
Great
gets
question.
with the orcs too, to that point,
Yes,
where they're
yeah,
coming
yeah.
up and they're like, well, we live in the dungeon, like we're from here, and
Yeah,
we're trying to
like,
find
yeah.
resources, and so like that. But also that scene was like when we first got introduced to the orcs, and they were like, "Wacha!" So like all of the people, I was like, oh, I mean, I get it, but at the same time, I was not expecting that from this anime. But
Yeah.
here we go, getting real.
I think that in the context of the real world, like it's great we can be educators, we can reach a lot of people by speaking to groups like this. I think in the fantasy realm of this dungeon or even like the Pokemon verse, I would be probably a lot more political. Like I'd be the person blocking the access to the caves, being like, you can't go in there. We only have 5 of these things left, you know, just basically like causing a ruckus and, you know, maybe trying to stop elves and those other groups. They have portals, they have magic paintings. It's gonna be hard, but like I would figure it out.
All right, well that does it for our time, everybody. Thank you all so much again for coming to our panel. And if you do have more questions, please come down to our booth, aisle 2200. We'll be down there answering as many questions as you like. And we've actually got some really cool specimens to show you. So we'll see you there.
Thank you, everyone.